Namaskar. Dignitaries on the dais, it's my distinct pleasure to say a few words in the form of valedictory speech, and in the same breath, thank everyone present here virtually and in person. It's an important occasion for us that we are celebrating 54th Foundation Day, and it's an occasion when all of us come together to celebrate what we have achieved as the Central Institute of Indian Languages. I take pleasure in thanking all the members who have joined us here, beginning from the former and present directors, and I have the pleasure to thank also the chairman, High Power Committee on Promotion of Indian Languages, the Joint Secretary Ministry of Education, the former and current employees of the Institute. I first would like to thank the chief guest, Srimati Neeta Prasad ji, who in a very few words gave us a very assuring promise that the efforts of the Institute are recognized and they would be encouraged by the ministry. Thank you, madam, for your valuable comments and time. So it is difficult for you to join us here. Though it was difficult for you to join us here, but you could take out some time virtually. We'll remain grateful for this. Professor D.B. Patnaik, Padmashri, has been the former director of CIL, founding director of CIL, and he has always taken out time for this institute if and whenever we have requested him to take out time for us. We are always inspired by your words, sir, and it's an occasion that we show our gratitude to you. We are very, very thankful that even at this stage, when the health may be creating difficulties for you, you have been able to travel here and cause inspirational feeling among us. We are very, very thankful for you, sir. And Professor Avdesh Kumar Mishra, Professor Rajesh Sachdeva, other professors sitting off the dais, the former and present colleagues representing the administration, academic, and support sections of the institute. I am happy to express my gratitude to you for coming to this program and making it successful. In the same breath, I am also thankful to Shri Chandu Krishna Sastri ji, Padmashri, who in a very short address gave us very insightful ideas. We remain grateful to you, sir. It's also an occasion that is marked by the collective efforts of various committees. So I am glad to present, based on record, the efforts put in by the technical committee, the food committee, committee for cultural programs, the souvenir committee, the sports committee, the publicity committee, and I should definitely like to thank the media friends who have come from various media groups, the executives and the professionals from media. Your efforts will go a long way in sending the message about the activities that the institute is performing. Kindly forgive me if I miss some names. We have lost some time in the initial technical glitches, so I would like to stop here and say collectively in one sentence that all persons present here, in person or virtually, are thanked, and I thank them all from the bottom of my heart, and the institute will remain grateful to you. Thank you, one and all. It's also time that we look forward to listening to our esteemed speakers. And in the first place today, we have Professor UN Singh, whose name is very, very familiar to anyone and everyone who is doing linguistics or translation studies or comparative literature or cultural studies in this country. Sir and madam, it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker of the day. I am very, very happy and feel blessed to introduce Professor UN Singh, Professor Uday Narayan Singh, who requires no introduction as such. But then as it is customary, I take pleasure in informing you that Professor Uday Narayan Singh has been associated with the Central Institute of Indian Languages, with Delhi University, with the University of Hyderabad, with Vishwa Bharati Shantiniketan, and Amity University. These are not just several universities that he is associated with. He is also responsible for establishing various centers, centers which have created a name in this country: Center for Applied Linguistics and Translation Studies, Center for Comparative Literature, Study in India Program, and things like that are just to name a few. Professor Uday Narayan Singh began writing at the age of 13, and he is known by three names: UNS, Uday Narayan Singh, and most importantly, Nachiketa, as he writes in Mathli and in the literary figures, he is known as Nachiketa. Professor UN Singh carried forward the interesting and inspiring tradition set by Padma Shri Professor T.P. Patnaik. He took the institute to greater heights and established schemes like National Translation Mission, National Testing Service India, Linguistic Data Consortium for Indian Languages, and several things like that. So it's my pleasure to introduce him and also inform the audience, because we draw inspiration from his accomplishments. He has been guiding the policies not just in India but also in 25 countries of the world. It's also important to take into account his writings have been providing insights to all researchers working in the areas of language studies, language sciences, literature, comparative literature, translation studies, and cultural studies. So post-retirement also, we notice that things he began at the age of 13. Post-retirement also, we notice that he has continued writing, and very recently he has published a book, and he has been associated with several other activities, including the activities of Science Academy. I mean, in a very nutshell, I can say that he is one of the chief architects of language studies in this country. With these words, I should like to take a pause here and allow you to directly listen to him. Over to Professor Uday Narayan Singh. Thank you so much.
I hope I'm audible to all of you. I'm trying to upload my presentation. I'm trying to share my screen. Please see if the screen is visible. If the screen is visible, I'll go ahead. The topic that I have chosen to talk on is titled Metaphors We Live By, Asian Perspectives in Translation. Now, interesting thing is that Professor D.P. Patnaik has always been a matter of wonder for many of us. And one of the things he did during our days of teaching elsewhere is that he could get some of the best minds from all over the world to come and spend time with Indian linguists in Mysore. During that course, one of the greatest linguists and literary critics who came was George Lakoff. Lekoff, as you know, has a book called Metaphors We Live By. And I remember he was writing the book at that time. The book was not yet published. And on the lawns of the hotel, practically whole night, Prabal Dasgupta and I spent time with Lekoff listening to his ideas on what exactly he's going to write in the book Metaphors We Live By. So I've chosen the title from there, and let me begin with the visual text. Now you have a visual text before you, and as you know, all new creations, whether it is literature or painting or music or film, all of them begin like this image. And we create fables, parables, legends around this kind of image. Now, if we are asked to describe this text or describe this image, what could be the tools that we use to describe them? That's the main question. Now, whether it is literary criticism or translation theory or linguistics or critical studies or culture studies, each one of them would need some tools to be able to describe a creative endeavor. Now, my contention and George Lakoff's contention is that we understand them with the help of metaphors. And there are many, many myths, painting myths, writing myths, and metaphors that we all come across. And the one that you see on the screen towards your left, a huge turtle, is one such metaphor. I think those who are in linguistics would remember John Ross and his dissertation, where in the dissertation of John Ross, there is a story that he narrates, some old woman who's saying about the iteration, about the interconnectivity, about the S goes to NPVP, and once again S coming back as a lower node. He says that this kind of a feature is something which needs to be explained, and the whole world is supported by a chain of increasing large turtles. Beneath each turtle, there is another turtle, and there are turtles all the way. So our description of the metaphors of the sun, of the moon, and the stars, and the planets, this is not true. It's all to be understood in terms of the metaphor of turtle. Now, we all know that mythological elements or mythological paintings are viewed as a kind of history painting. And the traditional tales of a culture or a society, they all depict a fact. They go on to make our myths. And it is these myths which we use to explain further characteristics of the people. So we build fables and stories and poems around such imageries. And often, whether you are a member of a society or not, whether you are an Indian or not, whether you are a Bengali or not, whether you are a Hindi speaker or not, is quite often perceived as, do you share the common myths? Do you share the metaphors? Now, there are many, many kinds of myths, and creation myth is one of them. And this one with which we began is also one of those creation myth depictions in one kind of society. Now, these are common to all the societies, all the communities, and whether it's Western or Asian, all of them have this kind of myth. There are different versions. You can think of different versions. And Renaissance art, or the cave paintings of Ajanta Ellora, or the images sculpted in the temples of South India, they all are part of this kind of creativity. And of course, we know that Italian Renaissance has made the art very famous to all over the world. Our contribution to the creativity reached much later to them, when we were, in a way, we were discovered by the Western critiques and people talked about us and about our creativity. Now, each mythical image, whether it's Apollo or Artemis, Zeus or Athena or Shiva, Krishna, Durga, Ganesha, all of them really kindle our imagination, and each one of them is really a switch to a story, which you switch on and a whole story emerges there. So the world has seen mythological paintings, sculptures, stories around all civilizations: Arabic, Celtic, Christian, Oriental, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, and Indian, all of them. Uh, 65 kilometers from Mysore, if you go to Bayalkuppe temple and look at the walls, I'm sure you will find so many stories which you otherwise see on Tibetan Tanka painting. Now, there are many similarities and resonances among these stories and these elements. And there are literary texts which are circled or built around a myth. So that's mythological texts or pictures could be based on medieval stories or ones from more recent ones. We know of Tagore, we know of Goethe, we know of Shakespeare, we know of Lord Tennyson. Of course, Kalidasa and Vidyapati, Jayadev are all well known. Everybody has grown up listening to Aesop's fables or Kabir Das Doha. All of them actually are using metaphors and are explained also with the help of metaphors on a daily basis. So this image formation or imagination in writing, in literature, and in language, if you look at Sir Thomas Mallory's work, there's Knights of the Round Table, La Mort d'Arthur, 1001 Arabian Nights, all of them have been made famous by their translators, by the painters, by the filmmakers. We have also heard of Grimm's fairy tales, the Grimm brother, or Hans Andersen's fairy tales. The giant Prakrit tales or epics like Iliad and Odyssey by Homer, or Mahabharata and Ramayana, they have really dominated for a long, long time. And there are many, many mythological paintings and images. I've given you a few here: The Birth of Venus or La Primavera. There are many, many others that can be given here. So, what are the parameters of analysis? How do we analyze them? How do these myths and metaphors influence our cultures and civilization? The more we try out analytical techniques, think about analytical techniques, the more we understand substance in terms of its chemical, physical property, or mixture of these properties. So each text that is to be analyzed triggers a wide variety of techniques. We should not think that all the texts are to be cast in the same manner. All of them are possible to analyze, to be analyzed in the same manner. It's like SOV languages, SVO languages, and VSO languages. They need different kinds of structures of grammar to be able to analyze. So it's like that. All creative art objects will be a text which are waiting to be read, to be comprehended, to be analyzed, and one needs to develop frameworks. How do we develop these frameworks? For literary analysis, art analysis, linguistic analysis. Now, you remember, a lot of people talk about delivery. As far as painting is concerned, they talk about delivery. As far as films are concerned, they also talk about delivery. What is the film delivering to you? And these are different kinds of deliveries which are triggered in an impromptu way or extraneous way or scripted or manuscripted or memorized deliveries. Those who are Smriti Purusha, somebody like Chamu Shastri ji, who can, mesmerize the audience by recalling things from memory and narrating them from the ancient text. So we talk about not only the delivery, we talk about the medium, the performance. So when we talk about plastic arts, look at the word plastic. What do we mean by plastic? Plastic is an element which is purely a chemical product, but we are using this to categorize certain kind of art activities. This is again a metaphorical use. We have been actually borrowing metaphors constantly. When we talk about the color of somebody's song, color of the text, color of the performance, the color of the screen, or composition, or symmetry or balance, the symmetry of the sentence, the balance of a sentence, any creative product that you talk about. These are all from different areas of knowledge or natural categories. And things like rhythm, harmony, contrast, these are all words which are used in a metaphorical manner in our descriptive tool and technology. The question is, do we not make mistakes in our interpretation and our understanding of a text or an image? We do, and therefore we need to have multiple translations of the same text so that we reach the logical structure of the text, which is there at the back of the mind of the author who's written that text. So let me present an example from art as this makes the point obvious. Look at this piece of art. This is by Georgia O'Keeffe called Red Canna. Now, 1887 is the date of the painting. This is part of a series of paintings that she had brought out in an abstract journal called Canna Lily Plant Series, all in watercolor initially. Later on, they use oil. Now, O'Keeffe had said that she made the painting to reflect the way she perceives flowers. She sees the flowers. But the critics have said, they have really criticized her. They said, no, these are erotic paintings reflecting female genitalia. Now, of course, the artist protested. She said that, well, I made you take time to look at what I saw. And when you took time to really notice my flower, you hung all your associations with the flower on my flower, and you write about my flower as if I think and see what you think and see. But I don't. So you can easily see that now you can actually make mistakes in interpreting. Any interpretative mistake will be carried forward in translation, in description. Look at this particular piece of painting, Architect's Home on the Ravine. In the ravine, in the hill area, you can see an artist's home, architect's home. And this is also 1959 Scottish painting. It's a magical realism painting, like the other one on the right-hand side of the screen, also magical realism painting. Now, this word, magic, realism, reality, real, unreal distinction, these are all metaphorical distinctions in a very interesting manner. Which is why when Chomsky talks about the deep and the surface structure, the depth of the deep and superficiality of the surface, we understand only purely metaphorically. So the fantasy and reality of all these are actually all metaphors. What grammar and linguistics does is capture and analyze the creative use of human language. In considering the methodology it must use in all traditions, one has only used metaphors as if we are somehow tied to metaphor. We can't help without using metaphor. So if you look at the karta and the karma in the Indian grammatical tradition, in the sentential description, there is a separate meaning for the word karta. There is a separate meaning for the word karma. Karta and karma in Indian and Hindu philosophy are very different, but we are using them in grammar. Or look at Sandhi. Sandhi in Indian system of economics and politics in Chanakya's Niti is very different, whereas we are talking about the Sandhi and Samasa here in grammar. So we are actually swearing by metaphors even in Indian grammatical tradition. And if you look at the expressions such as case, tense, aspect, subject, or object, or passivity, in English grammatical tradition, same problem. We are actually using metaphors. So in modern linguistics also, when Spassky or other people talk about the fact, I remember I had a paper on fact, weight, and relation. How heavy the sentential extension is, depending on that, certain grammatical tendencies happen or do not happen. And this is a paper which I presented in CIL when I came from University of Hyderabad. All these are actually examples of metaphor. In translation theory as well, when we talk about the gains and losses of translation, when we talk about the cannibalistic translation, cannibalistic approach in translation, what is these? This is all examples of metaphor. Now, there is a kind of cultural and linguistic relativity that we are using here. Question this comes to my mind often is the act of translation at the mercy of the pairs of languages or cultures that you choose? Are we bound by the metaphors, bound by the categories there? Assuming translation is a cultural act, we also ask this question, what do we mean by culture? Is it that complex whole which includes all these things: knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, language, all capabilities and habits which we acquired as man and a member of our society? This is the definition of Edward Teller in 1871. So, in a way, language is contained in culture, and language is also constrained by the culture. So, does the language define, determine, bend, mend culture as it needs to be? So, it looks like the ghost of Sapir and Whorf, or the ghost of that hypothesis, linguistic relativity hypothesis, is still, the crowding on our shoulders. And Sapir in 1921 had said that human beings do not live in the objective world alone, nor alone in the world of social activity as ordinarily understood, but are very much at the mercy of particular languages. And this is very interesting when we talk about translation in the Indian context, in the Asian context. Now, our case is very peculiar. India has always been on the move. It has never been like the bird in the cage. Thanks to Sudhir Mathur, who has given this painting to me to use here. In India, translation has always been allowed to travel outside this cage, outside the home. We have always traveled between texts, between cultures, between communities, and between two or more times and spaces. If you're talking about Ramayana, when it travels down south in Kamba Ramayana, it becomes different. When you travel with your Mahabharata down to Karnataka, then Arjun becomes the king, not really Yudhishthira. So there are many changes that we make here as the texts keep traveling. We interpolate, and as we travel, we actually kind of trying to mediate between different societies, different communities, different cultures. That's what Sherry Simon is talking about translation in the Asian context. So India has always been on the crossroad of translation during the last few millennia. And four major pathways that have emerged: language, literature, culture, and society. They're very interestingly interconnecting. And the nation state called Bharat or India, it has emerged as a very unique cultural space which has absorbed numerous thoughts, numerous religious beliefs: the Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Tibetan version of the religious thoughts. In our worlds, our translations have mediated between very different religious beliefs and culture. And in the case of translation theory, says Maria Timoczko in her essay Enlarging Western Translation Theory, integrating non-Western thoughts about translation, she says the current presuppositions are generally or markedly Eurocentric. So we need to think about an Asian perspective on translation. So what is the Asian perspective? And I'll give you a few examples and I will end because you are running behind the time. Is there a division? Is there a North-South division in the theory of translation? Is there a South-North division? Whichever way you look at it, I think there is. And we believe in India and China and Japan and Korea that translation is an ethnography. There have been large number of views on this issue. There's a text in the Western Han dynasty, which is a story where we find a dialogue on translation between Confucius and a king. There's a king who wishes to learn a foreign language. because they have heard so much about India at that point of time. We also know that a lot of knowledge needs to be brought into China from India. So Confucius says to the king that you better concentrate on ruling the country. You better focus on governance. Let the translators handle translation because that's a very specialized kind of act. So translation was for a long time considered to be a professional act, an act which is important academic activity, which will be used to bring the Chinese readers a description of the best in the world. Now, some Chinese comparatists say and also suggest that translation has always been looked at as ethnography. Red Chan, in particular, in 2003, she had said that. Some others tried the related translation with transnationalism. It is a translation which has allowed them to create a nationalism or create a transnationalism. Secondly, for us, translation has also been like double articulation. Remember Hockett's description of language as double articulation, as if we are speaking twice. There's an anecdote from Three Kingdom period in China about the monks who came to Wushan. One of them, Zhu Jiangyan, he was asked to translate some passage from Buddhist scripture in Pali, which he did in not very elegant Chinese. So then he was asked this question by Zhu Xian, why there is lack of elegance in translation? Then another monk came forward and responded on his behalf, saying that the meaning of the Buddha should be translated simply, without ornamentation. Because if you ornament that, literally adorn literary in a literary manner with that, the real meaning or intent of Buddha's advice will get lost. So then they quoted two traditional maxims. One of them is given by Lao Shi, says beautiful words are untrue, true words are not beautiful. Another one given by Confucius, speech cannot be fully recorded by writing, speech cannot fully capture meaning. Very interesting metaphors. I'm sure I will leave you to think about this further and see how beautifully the Asian thoughts have emerged in the area of translation. So in Asia, we were long aware of the fact that there are gaps between the logical and the ideal text, which is there in the author's mind, author's head and cognition, which gets generated on the surface, which are undeniable and indelible. You can't erase the ideal logical text, even when you recreate that in different kind of surfaces. So you have a surface of image making, painting. You create an image of Lord Krishna as a child, or Krishna with the gopis dancing around. So the surface may be different. Surface of Mira's bhajan, surface of the painting done by Raja Ravi Verma could be very different, but never mind, there's a logical text behind that. All written texts are already twice removed from speech, and hence another written rendering or creative rendering of such text must mimic this typical feature of double articulation. So there is a point about beauty and truth or compromises that must be made. And it is from these compromises that we have to understand the original text and translate. So in ancient India and Tibet, translation always allowed us to travel, as I said, and translation acted also as a kinship term. It allowed the strangers and others to be appropriated within the self. So when Ashwaghosha's Buddha Charita is translated into Tibetan, and remember that in the original Sanskrit is lost. We don't know what was the original Sanskrit like. So we actually today retranslated, back translated from Tibetan into Sanskrit to understand what Ashwaghosha might have written. So what did it do then? Translation allowed the Tibetans to appropriate the other culture into the self. This is also kind of mediation and building a kinship term. During the Han dynasty, there were mediators like Anshigao, a Persian, who translated the sutras, Buddhist sutras, from varieties of Sanskrit like Buddhist, hybrid Sanskrit and Pali, into Chinese, introduced Indian astronomy to China. And we all know about Huanzong, or Huensang, as some people pronounce the name, the famous monk of the Tang dynasty, who is perhaps the best example of how one civilization learns from the other. He left Xi'an, the capital of Tang Empire, in 628 AD on a quest for sacred texts in India, in ancient India, and returned in 645 after about 17 years with 124 collections of Sanskrit aphorisms and 520 manuscripts. He had a caravan of 22 horses, and anybody who today also goes to Great Wild Goose Pagoda in Xi'an, as I have been there, I remember the guide showed me the pagoda, which actually broke into two parts because of thunderstorm, and from inside all those old manuscripts came out, the manuscripts which Wen Shang had brought in. In 19 years then, after bringing those manuscripts, they translated 1335 volumes of these manuscripts. See, this is how two civilizations tried to understand each other. So what is a political tool? Shindaya is a political tool which they mentioned in ancient China, because there are people like Yan Fu who translated the Western texts like Evolution and Ethics, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, Spencer's Study of Sociology, John Stuart Mill's On Liberty into China to be able to understand. We also had our own people like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who brought in various kinds of texts from Persian tradition, British, English tradition, European tradition into our languages. So Fu cautioned that to fight against intellectually superior cultures, alien powers, for their context it was Japan, for our context it could be European civilization, we need to do a lot of translation. In fact, one of the basic reasons for the National Translation Mission as set up in 2008, we saw translation as being a very interesting political and knowledge tools. All good translators must have a thorough understanding of the source text. They must also be aware of the expectations of the target language reader. So the triple criteria that Chinese often talked about is faithfulness, fluency, and elegance, or Shindaya, in the evolution and ethics of translation. Now, you don't always find this in the Western theories of translation. And as we all know, translation has so many names in India: Chayanubad, Bhavanubad, Bhashantar, Tarzuma, Anukriti, Anuvad. Now, what is Anuvad? Anuvad is basically, Vad is Vad or Vak is speaking. Anuvad is speaking after, which means basically when the original author has spoken, translator must speak after, and it has to be timed after, and it has to follow that text to be able to bring out that knowledge. And that is interesting in our case. So we understand translation almost like a religion in our case. Whereas what happens in the West? In the West, I don't go into detail, but they talk about governance. Which text will rule? In the sands of tomb, should the original author Gitanjali Shri rule, or should the translator rule? And metaphor of disease. Quite often in the Western theory of translation, they could talk about the contaminated text, uncontaminated text, interpolations, manipulations of translation. They talk about war, like gains and losses of translation. They talk about inheritance. They talk about recursion. They talk about agency. These are all concepts in the Western tradition. Now, we know that India has always been multicentric. In fact, both D.P. Patnaik ji and Samu Shastri ji and also Shailendra Mohan talked about multicentricity of the country, how the whole institutes central list of Indian languages has been created and how it is being recreated every day to emphasize this point about multicentric space. In fact, this has been repeatedly emphasized by the Honorable Prime Minister in his, in his radio talks, that it's one nation and many at the same time. It's not surprising that we have had civilizations like this with flexible borders. The reason why there was no fixed political boundary called India is because of the nature of our civilization. India has always been one culture and many. While this is seemingly contradictory for the Western audience, it is nevertheless true for us. We talk about India of multiple identities, which are structured at different layers. I can be myself. My mother is a Bengali, my father is a Maithili speaker. I write in both Bengali and Maithili. And both of them, my father and mother taught Hindi literature. So I also write in Hindi. And I studied through Bangla medium, but I do my linguistics in English. So I also write in English. So I have these multiple linguistic identities. So the identities like Aryan versus Dravidian, Brahmin versus Baniya, the twice born versus scheduled caste, forward versus backward. I don't think this is the way to look at India. India is all these. In spite of all these diversities, the pressure of living together for thousands of years has created, as Murray B. Emino has said in 1958, India as a linguistic area. I think this is very important that that we have actually understood India in this particular manner. And I thank all of you for patiently listening to me during last few moments when I tried to explain to you what do we mean by metaphors we live by. I think this is very crucial that we have to understand our metaphors, we have to analyze all our texts through metaphors. And I'm sure somebody in Translation Mission would be taking this forward and elaborating these ideas and writing more and more about it. So thank you, Shailendra Mohanji, for giving me the chance to talk.